So people who think that these white boys killed Nolan when there's no evidence that that happened are now threatening to kill these white boys, their family, and they have been arrested. How does these white boys need attorneys? Y'all done put it out there that people think they killed Nolan.
There's a new arrest in the Nolan Wells case, and before you assume you know what that means, you need to hear exactly what's written in the federal court documents, because it is almost certainly not what you think. A young man travels to a small barrier island off the coast of Mississippi to celebrate the 4th of July with a group of friends. 2 days later, he's found dead. And in the time since, this story has spiraled into something far bigger than a single tragic death. It has become a battleground of accusations, lawsuits, harassment campaigns, misinformation, and now, a growing list of federal criminal charges. But those charges are not what most headlines are implying. So let's slow down and go through this properly. What actually happened out on that island? What the court documents actually say about this new arrest? Why the case has produced not one, not two, but 3 separate federal prosecutions that have almost nothing to do with how Nolan Wells actually died? And why understanding that distinction might be the single most important thing you take away from this entire story.
A man in southwest suburban Berwyn was arrested for making death threats against people who were involved in this unresolved case. Now our investigative reporter Chuck Gowdy in studio revealing that Berwyn man's violent history and has the first photos of this accused threat maker. Chuck.
You do, Allison. Stephan, the Berwyn man's name is Edward James Porter, now facing federal charges in the Nolan Wells case for allegedly threatening to murder witnesses and their family members. 33-year-old Porter is being transferred by U.S. Marshals to the courthouse down in Mississippi. Our investigation of Porter's past finds a Metro Chicago man repeatedly described by authorities as a threat to safety because of his numerous arrests for violence and saying he was going to shoot people.
Let's start with what we know about Nolan himself, because it matters. Nolan Wells was 18 years old, a black student athlete out of Ocean Springs, Mississippi, with a background in football. Those who knew him have described him as well-liked, physically capable, and by all accounts, a strong swimmer. That detail becomes important later, because it's one of the reasons his family has pushed back so hard against early assumptions about how he died. On July 4th, Nolan joined a large group of friends for a trip out to Horn Island. If you've never heard of it, Horn Island sits roughly 10 miles off the Mississippi Gulf Coast. It's part of a protected national seashore, which means there's no development out there, no permanent buildings, no convenience stores, no cell towers close enough to guarantee reliable signal. It's a beautiful place during the day, when boats crowd the shoreline for a holiday like the 4th of July, and it becomes an entirely different environment after dark, isolated, quiet, and completely dependent on whoever you came with to get you home. According to accounts from Nolan's friends, at some point that evening, the boat they'd taken out started having mechanical trouble. Specifically, a malfunctioning bilge pump, the kind of issue that can quickly turn a fun day trip into a safety concern, since a boat that's taking on water isn't something you want to be stuck with miles from shore after sunset. Records later showed the group had actually called for a tow from a company called Sea Tow before ultimately canceling that request and handling the situation themselves, with one of the friends, Bart Edmiston Jr., helping tow the disabled boat back toward the mainland. Here's where the story turns. According to the friends who made it back that night, Nolan chose to stay behind on the island. He reportedly told them he planned to catch a later ride back with another group of people who were also out there celebrating the holiday. That, according to his friends, is the last time any of them saw him alive. And notably, the group returned to shore with Nolan's cell phone still in their possession, a detail that has fueled plenty of online speculation, even though there's no confirmed explanation from investigators about exactly why that happened. When Nolan didn't come home that night, his mother and one of his friends reported him missing. Search and rescue crews were deployed, combing the waters and shoreline around Horn Island. 2 days later, on July 6th, his body was recovered near the northwestern tip of the island. In the immediate aftermath, Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter addressed the public and said that, at that point in the investigation, there was no sign of foul play. But he was careful to qualify that statement. The case, he said, remained open and active. That distinction between no sign of foul play right now and this has been ruled an accident is one that Nolan's family has clung to from the very beginning, and honestly, it's a distinction worth understanding because it shapes everything that happens next in this story. Nolan's parents, Elmore Wansley and Christine Wansley, did not accept the early framing of this case quietly. They pointed out that their son was, by all accounts, an athletic young man and a capable swimmer, and they questioned why an early narrative suggesting an accidental drowning was allowed to take hold so quickly, before a full investigation had even been completed. They also raised concerns about a lack of communication from local authorities, saying they felt left in the dark about basic developments in their own son's case. So they did what a lot of families in their position do when they feel like official channels aren't giving them straight answers. They brought in outside help. Specifically, they retained nationally recognized civil rights attorney Ben Crump, a name you've probably heard before in connection with other high-profile cases involving questions of race and justice in America. Crump's team launched an independent investigation running parallel to the official one, and as part of that effort, the family commissioned their own private autopsy, separate from whatever the state of Mississippi was doing internally. Now, let's talk about what that independent autopsy actually found, because this is a point where a lot of online commentary has gotten ahead of the facts. According to Crump, the forensic pathologist who conducted the independent exam listed the cause and manner of Nolan's death as undetermined.
The state of Mississippi is trying to reshape the narrative on the Nolan Wells death? Really?
Pending further investigation. That is a specific, technical finding. Undetermined does not mean homicide. It does not mean accident. It means the evidence available at that specific point was not sufficient to draw a confident conclusion either way. Crump has said that the pathologist told the family foul play could not be ruled out, which again is different from evidence of foul play being found. It simply means the door hasn't been closed on that possibility. Meanwhile, the official state autopsy, the one being handled by Mississippi authorities, has still not been released to the public in any form. Prosecutors overseeing this case have said publicly that all evidence, and that includes the state's autopsy findings, will remain sealed until it is formally presented to a grand jury. If you're not familiar with how that process works, it's worth pausing here to explain it, because it directly explains why this case feels so frustratingly quiet from the outside. A grand jury is a group of citizens convened specifically to review evidence gathered by prosecutors and investigators and to decide whether that evidence is sufficient to support formal criminal charges. Grand jury proceedings are, by law in most jurisdictions, conducted in secret. That secrecy exists for a handful of reasons: to protect the reputation of people who might ultimately not be charged with anything, to prevent witnesses from being influenced or intimidated before they testify, and to preserve the integrity of an investigation that's still ongoing. So when officials say evidence is sealed until it goes to a grand jury, that's not necessarily a sign of a cover-up. It's a standard, legally required step in a lot of criminal investigations. But it's also, understandably, excruciating for a grieving family and a curious public who just want answers.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for having us, for platforming our son's story. As many of you know, his 19th birthday is next Wednesday. And it's, as the days gets closer, and it's definitely getting harder, that realization is really sinking in. That we don't have our son physically here anymore. And I think a lot of people have forgotten. Only thing we want to know is what happened. That's all we want to know, is what happened to our son. Because Many parents out there, you still have your children. You still can hug them. You still can call them. You still can celebrate their life with them. And we do not have that anymore. Our lives have forever changed. This new normal is something I would never wish on anyone, not even my worst enemy. The hurt that we feel daily, the conversations that we have to have, not just with each other, but also with our other children as they are grieving as well. So we ask that everyone, please, next Wednesday, join us in prayer. As for us as a family, but also too for everyone out there, but especially for Nolan and the process that we're going through. And again, we thank you so much.
And that gap between what people desperately want to know and what officials are legally able to release is precisely the kind of vacuum where speculation thrives. And in this case, it has thrived in some genuinely troubling ways. Multiple outlets have reported that social media has been flooded with amateur theories, unverified claims about what supposedly happened on that boat and on that island, and, more seriously, fabricated content, including material generated using artificial intelligence, designed to look like real leaked evidence, real documents, or real toxicology results. None of that circulating content has been verified by investigators. None of it should be treated as established fact by anyone watching this video. But it has spread widely anyway, and it has helped fuel a level of public anger that has, disturbingly, crossed the line from online arguing into real-world criminal behavior.
You can just listen to what the boy told me after I asked him questions. Make your judgment. But instead, I get so much hate and people saying I hate my own people and threatening to kill me because I interviewed white boys that they said knew what happened to Nolan, killed Nolan. Here's some of the people that's ridiculously lying about the whole thing. Wrote a clip.
Did you catch this in Random Tatum's interview?
About anything else that was mentioned, thousands of lies, and now, the audio comes back, and all of a sudden we can hear Nolan yelling in the background, screaming, we're screaming about how he's dead. That's just a complete lie, and it's another lie.
Release the audio of the staged video then. Release it. That's a big slip up. It's a big mistake to say those words when you were actually there.
Some people are saying things and they're not involved. And some of the things that they're saying is maybe embarrassing to them and they're not involved in this. But Nolan is not on any of these boats that's in the video. To protect other people's privacy that have nothing to do with this case. That's the only reason why we haven't put the video out and played the audio, because other people's voices are in it. People are talking in the background and it's not reasonable.
Which brings us to the actual center of this video. Because while the question of exactly what happened to Nolan Wells on Horn Island remains legally unresolved, a completely separate criminal story has been unfolding around it. Not a story about how Nolan died, but a story about what people around the country have been doing and saying in reaction to his death. And it is, frankly, one of the more disturbing case studies in modern true crime obsession that we've covered. Let's go through each of these cases individually, because the details matter, and because the pattern that emerges once you line them all up together is genuinely alarming. We'll start with the most recent one, since it's the headline driving this video. The man's name is Edward James Porter from Berwyn, Illinois, a suburb just outside Chicago. According to a federal criminal complaint filed by Homeland Security Investigations, on or around July 31st, Porter placed a series of phone calls and sent text messages to two separate witnesses connected to the Wells investigation. One of those witnesses has been identified in multiple reports as Bart Edmiston Jr., the same young man who helped tow the disabled boat back to shore on the night Nolan disappeared. Edmiston's name had become publicly attached to this case after GPS location data pulled from his boat was referenced in a report from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources. That single administrative detail appears to be what turned him into an online target, despite the fact that, according to his own attorney and his college football coach, he has never been named a suspect by investigators at any point.
Chicago's investigative team reported last week a man living in this west suburban Berwyn apartment was arrested for allegedly making death threats to witnesses in the case to kill them, anyone in their homes, and any cops. Porter is also accused by federal prosecutors of threatening to cut up one witness and stuff the remains into a suitcase. Now, NBC5 Investigates uncovers the first photo of Edward Porter. This picture is from the Cook County Jail in 2025. But records we've obtained show Porter's criminal history began years earlier, in 2011, with 24 arrests.
Think about this. White people so bad in America, and racism is so bad in America, that when a black boy dies, black people threaten to kill people. Like, what? I just don't understand. And then they go, the system is against us. Look at this mother track record. Look at his arrest record, bruh. Some of y'all ain't had a job this long. Some of y'all ain't consistently been on a job this many years. He is consistently breaking the law and getting out of jail. What happened to black people when they get in trouble, they get wet? Look at this. Most of y'all watching have done nothing from 2011 to 2026. One thing, some of y'all ain't been married that long. Roll the clip.
To follow for domestic violence, breaking court orders of protection, and theft. A city and suburban drifter with no known ties to Nolan Wells or Mississippi. Porter had an Illinois firearm owner card and a handgun that were taken from him when police say he threatened his ex-girlfriend, quote, "I'm going to shoot you." Charges later dropped when she stood down, and it's not known whether the FOID card and gun were returned to Porter. But now, after numerous gun violence, assault, and threat charges by Chicago authorities, most later dropped because the victim wouldn't testify, Porter is facing his first federal charges, accused of inserting himself for unstated reasons into this death mystery in Mississippi. The case against him, according to U.S. investigators, has a trail of cell phone calls from Porter to Mississippi witnesses and IP addresses, all linking back to him and this Berwyn apartment where he was living. When Porter was arrested 11 days ago, Berwyn police accompanied federal agents with the Chicago FBI field office apprehension team. According to Berwyn police records that NBC5 Investigates obtained under the Freedom of Information Act, Porter did not put up a fight. He's due at a Gulfport, Mississippi courtroom on September 3rd. That'll be the first time he's seen down there.
According to the federal complaint, Porter told this witness he was going to, quote, "come kill them and their entire family." He allegedly claimed to know their home address, and prosecutors say he actually texted that address to the witness, along with a claim that he was physically outside their home at that moment. If that alone isn't disturbing enough, the complaint says Porter then called a second witness and escalated even further, threatening to kill everyone inside the house, including any law enforcement officers who might respond, and describing, in graphic, specific detail, a plan to cut the body up and stuff the remains into a suitcase. Investigators traced these calls and messages back to Porter by subpoenaing phone records from Boost Mobile, identifying both the phone number and the IP address allegedly used to make contact. Porter is now facing a federal charge of transmitting a threatening communication in interstate commerce, a serious offense given that these threats crossed state lines from Illinois into Mississippi. Here's the detail that should genuinely stop you in your tracks. Federal prosecutors have said, on the record, that Porter had no known connection whatsoever to Nolan Wells, to his family, or to anyone actually involved in this case. He wasn't there on July 4th. He didn't know Edmiston. He didn't know the Wells family. By every account in the court filings, he was simply a stranger who had been consuming this story online and decided, apparently out of pure anger, fueled by social media content, to threaten to kill and dismember a person he had never met, over a case unfolding more than 500 miles from his own home. Initially, a federal judge in the Northern District of Illinois granted Porter bond, meaning he would have been released while awaiting trial. But once the case moved to the Southern District of Mississippi, where the actual alleged victims live, a different federal judge, U.S. District Judge Louis Girola Jr., overruled that decision and ordered Porter jailed pending a full detention hearing. Assistant U.S. Attorney Hunter McCreet argued to the court that Porter posed what he called a significant risk to the victims, pointing specifically to the fact that Porter has no ties to Mississippi at all, which prosecutors argued made his stated willingness to reach across state lines and target specific individuals even more concerning. Porter is now the third person to face federal charges for threats connected to this case in roughly a single month, and when you look closely at the other two cases, a clear and troubling pattern starts to take shape. The second arrest in this string involved a woman named Michelle Francine Edwards from Cincinnati, Ohio. According to court documents, on July 23rd, Edwards placed more than 20 phone calls within an 8-minute window to the George County Chancery Clerk's office. Investigators say she used a caller ID blocking code to hide her number, and that she told employees things like, "The clock is ticking," and "Do not go outside." Less than an hour after that call spree ended, prosecutors say Edwards shifted her attention to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, calling roughly 8 more times and claiming there was an actual bomb planted outside the building. That call was serious enough to trigger a real lockdown and a full bomb sweep of the sheriff's office, meaning actual law enforcement personnel and resources had to be diverted in real time to respond to what officials now allege was a completely fabricated threat made by someone with no direct connection to the underlying Wells case at all. Edwards has since appeared in court, pleaded not guilty, and was released on bond under specific conditions while her case moves forward. If convicted, she faces up to 5 years in prison and a fine of up to $250,000. The first arrest, chronologically, was Joseph Alfredo Vasquez Dumarce from Sacramento, California. His alleged target wasn't a witness or a law enforcement office. It was a sitting judge. Ashley Cole is a Chancery Court judge in Jackson County, and here's why she's connected to this case at all. Judge Cole is the stepmother of Warren Hudson, one of the friends who had been out on Horn Island with Nolan on the night he disappeared. Cole spoke publicly early in the case, stating that her stepson was fully cooperating with investigators and firmly denying any suggestion that her family was attempting to obstruct or interfere with the investigation in any way. According to a federal affidavit from FBI Special Agent Brody Gibson, someone using the online username YAA962 sent Judge Cole a series of increasingly threatening messages through Facebook and Instagram. One message read, quote, "There will be a package coming to your guy's office in the next few days. It's gonna blow you away when you see it. LOL. Once that package is opened, the timer will start, and then you have maybe 10 seconds or less to ask God forgiveness." Other messages allegedly referenced sending the boys to witness violence and described, in the FBI's words, "so much blood everywhere." Investigators say they traced that account, along with associated email, Cash App, and Google account activity, back to an address in Sacramento connected to Dumas. A federal grand jury indicted him on a charge of interstate transmission of a threatening communication, which carries a maximum penalty of up to 5 years in prison. He remains in custody in Sacramento County, and under the terms of his case, he's currently ineligible for bail. It's also worth noting, because court records made it public, that Dumas has a prior record unrelated to this case, a 2019 arrest in Sacramento involving allegations connected to a minor and subsequent convictions listed under California's Megan's Law Registry. It's important to be precise here. Those prior convictions are legally and factually separate from the current federal threat charge. We're including that detail only because it's part of the public record that multiple news outlets have reported, not because it has any established connection to his alleged conduct in the Wells case. So take a step back and look at what we actually have. 3 defendants, 3 different states, Illinois, Ohio, and California. 3 completely separate federal cases. And in every single one, prosecutors say the defendants had no real-world connection to Nolan Wells, his family, or the people they targeted. These were strangers who inserted themselves violently into a tragedy they only knew through a phone screen. And the harassment connected to this case extends well beyond these 3 criminal prosecutions. Nolan's mother, Christine Wansley, a nurse practitioner, has described sustained harassment throughout this process. A flood of negative, clearly coordinated reviews targeting her workplace online, hostile messages sent directly to her, and even hateful content mailed to her family's home address. At one point, an anonymous complaint was filed against her with the Mississippi Board of Nursing, alleging professional misconduct completely unrelated to her son's case. That complaint triggered a formal review of her nursing career. Attorney Ben Crump later announced that the board reviewed the complaint and closed it entirely, calling it, in his words, frivolous and unfounded, and describing it as an apparent attempt to intimidate a grieving mother into silence. Wansley remains employed, with no disciplinary action taken and no prior complaints on her professional record. On the other side of this case, the friends who were with Nolan that day say they've faced an entirely different but equally intense wave of harassment. Warren Hudson's family says they've received death threats that included racial slurs and direct accusations that Hudson himself was somehow responsible for what happened to Nolan. Accusations Hudson has firmly and repeatedly denied. One caller reportedly used the chilling phrase, quote, "son for a son," language that Hudson's father, Dr. Benjamin Hudson, found disturbing enough that he shared audio recordings of these threatening calls directly with local media, so the public could hear exactly what his family had been enduring. In response to Nolan's death, the Hudson family has separately offered a $50,000 reward for information leading to an arrest in the actual case of how Nolan died. A reward that exists completely independently from the harassment and threat prosecutions we've just walked through.
Racism, when race is not even apparent or there's no evidence of race, and then I'm watching it would appear to be innocent people being accused with no evidence, but hey, that's not I don't know these people. I reached out to Benjamin Crump. Hey, Benjamin Crump, what can you tell my audience? What do you know? Because what it looks like to us is that there's no racism. There's no impropriety yet. They don't respond. The other side responds. Hey, we would like to do an interview with you. They vetted me. We interviewed. I interviewed the kids. I put the interview out. People didn't even have to mention my name. I'm not a part of the interview. You can just listen to what the boy told me after I asked him questions. Make your judgment. But instead, I get so much hate and people saying I hate my own people and threatening to kill me because I interviewed white boys that they said knew what happened to Nolan, killed Nolan.
The black community knows when it comes to the king of the this is the final boss. This wears a super cape for white folks. And listen, let's not get it misconstrued. I'm all for holding the black community accountable. I think everybody should be held accountable, regardless of race. And if you know anything about this podcast, the history of this podcast, I've always held my own people accountable. But what I won't do is just make it seem like what he's doing, which is he only holds black people accountable. Everything you do is about black.
I want y'all to go after this video and look at my social media and look at all of my social media. These people are so deranged. It's crazy to me. What happens is when you are a community of people that want no accountability, when someone mentions accountability for you, you flip out and you make it all about you. If you look at my social media, I hold everybody accountable. When you cutting up, you cutting up. White police officers, black police officers. White politicians, black politicians. Democrats, Republicans, I call everybody out. And to be this stupid and to be a grown man to say that I only call out black people is crazy. The difference is when I call out a white person doing something wrong, I feel like white people generally, hey, we don't claim that person. Black people, a man can kill 400 black people and a white cop kill him in a justified shooting, black people mad at you.
Bart Edmiston Jr., the young man targeted in Porter's alleged threats, has also spoken about the toll this has taken. He's maintained throughout that he was never named a suspect by investigators, a point that was publicly reinforced by his college football coach, Jay Sovell, at the University of Wyoming, where Edmiston plays as a punter and had earned a preseason all-conference selection. Sovell stated clearly that Edmiston has never been under suspicion in connection with Nolan's death. Edmiston has since retained attorney Russell Latino, specifically to pursue defamation claims against people he says falsely accused him online, based largely on that single detail about his boat's GPS data being referenced in an official Marine report. That defamation angle has actually become one of the more significant developing threads in this entire story, separate from both the original death investigation and the threat prosecutions. Warren Hudson and another friend, Jack Spitalo, launched a fundraiser through GiveSendGo specifically to cover anticipated legal costs tied to defending themselves and pursuing action against people spreading what they call false accusations online. A third friend, Morgan Seymour, was later added as a beneficiary of that same fund. As of early August, the fundraiser had collected more than $159,000. Dr. Benjamin Hudson has said publicly that the fund exists both to defend the teens against any potential legal action from the Wells family's side and to support their own lawsuits over what he described as slander and libel that has spread about them online. Just this past week, two attorneys representing that group of friends, Tyler Cox and Edward Andrew Paltzik, physically traveled out to Horn Island themselves. According to reporting, they went specifically to understand the physical layout of the island firsthand, presumably to help build their defamation case with an accurate picture of the environment where all of this unfolded. In a public statement, they said, quote, "Starting today, those who wish to continue trafficking in lies about these good Ocean Springs young men will be held accountable to the maximum extent of the law. We, on the other hand, will be focused solely on the truth, which is that these innocent young men had nothing whatsoever to do with the tragic death of Nolan Wells." According to reporting, the legal team says it has already identified specific individuals it intends to name as initial defendants once those lawsuits are filed. So let's actually sit with where that leaves this entire case, because it's more layered than a single headline can capture. On one side, you have a grieving family who says they still do not have real, official answers about how their son died. They're dealing with a sealed state autopsy, sealed evidence, an active grand jury process with no public timeline, and what they've openly described as inadequate communication from local investigators throughout the process. On the other side, you have a group of young friends and their families who say they've done absolutely nothing wrong and who are now dealing with what they describe as a wave of online mob justice, false accusations, doxing, and in at least one documented instance, an actual criminal threat serious enough to result in a federal indictment. Serious enough that they're now preparing their own lawsuits, not out of malice, but because they say their lives, reputations, and safety have been upended by a case they say they had no role in. And caught directly in the middle of all of that is a legal system that, as of the recording of this video, has not accused a single person of actually causing Nolan Wells' death. No suspects have been formally named. No one has been arrested in direct connection to what happened on that island on the night of July 4th. Every single arrest made so far in this story involves someone reacting to the case from a distance, and reacting not with concern, not with advocacy, but with threats of extreme violence against total strangers. That's really the heart of what makes Edward Porter's arrest so significant, and why we wanted to break this down in detail instead of just repeating the surface-level headline. It is not the breakthrough in the underlying case that a lot of people online are going to assume it is when they see the word arrest attached to the Nolan Wells name. It is, instead, a sobering illustration of exactly how far this story has spiraled outside the boundaries of the actual investigation. A grown man in a Chicago suburb, who had never met a single person connected to this case, decided that the appropriate response to watching this story unfold on his phone was to threaten to kill and dismember a stranger in Mississippi. And disturbingly, he's not an isolated example. He's the third person in roughly a month to face federal charges for exactly this kind of behavior tied to this case. That raises a genuinely uncomfortable set of questions worth sitting with. In a case that already touches on race, class, grief, and public trust in law enforcement, what happens when the loudest online voices start to overwhelm the actual legal process? What happens to a grieving family's ability to get real answers when local investigators and federal agents have to divert time and resources toward chasing down bomb threats and death threats instead of focusing entirely on the original case? And just as importantly, what happens to due process for young people like Bart Edmiston, Warren Hudson, Jack Spitalo, and Morgan Seymour, who are effectively being tried and convicted in the court of public opinion, sometimes based on nothing more than a single line in a boating report, long before any actual court has reviewed the sealed evidence in this case? Because here's the truth, and it's worth saying plainly at the end of a video like this: we still do not know exactly what happened to Nolan Wells on Horn Island. The state's evidence remains sealed. The official autopsy has not been released. The grand jury has not yet reviewed the full picture, which means neither have we, and neither has anyone posting theories online. What we do know, with certainty, based on public court filings and verified reporting, is this: a young man is dead, and his family is still fighting for real information about why. A group of his friends say their lives have been upended by accusations they insist are false. 3 separate strangers, in 3 separate states, with no real connection to any of the people involved, are now facing federal charges for threatening extreme violence over a case they only ever watched unfold on a screen. And an isolated island off the coast of Mississippi remains at the center of one of the more emotionally volatile investigations happening in the country right now. This story is not close to over. The grand jury process is still ahead, and there's no public timeline for when, or if, that evidence becomes public. Multiple defamation lawsuits appear to be forming on the side of the friends who were present that night. The reward for information in Nolan's actual death is still active. And if the pattern of the last several weeks holds, there is a real possibility that we see additional arrests, additional legal filings, or new developments before we ever get meaningfully closer to understanding what actually happened to Nolan Wells. Before you go, I want to be completely clear about something. Everything covered in this video is based on public federal court documents, filed criminal charges, and reporting from established news organizations, including NBC News, USA Today, the Clarion Ledger, the Biloxi Sun-Herald, and NOLA.com. Nothing in this video reflects a personal accusation against anyone who has not been formally charged with a crime, and no official cause of death has been determined by authorities as of this recording. The investigation into how Nolan Wells died remains active, ongoing, and legally unresolved. If you want to stay updated as this case continues to unfold, in what has clearly become one of the more consequential and closely watched investigations in the country, make sure you're subscribed to this channel, because based on everything we've just walked through, there is almost certainly more to come.